For those who have witnessed a wedding objection during the speak now or forever hold your peace portion, what happened? About 5 years ago, a coworker of mine invited all of us to his wedding. He was a great guy but none of us had ever met his wife, seen pictures of her, and he always said nothing but good things of her. Fast forward to the wedding. It was an incredibly nice one. Looks like they paid quite a bit for it. Everything was going smooth, and I was having fun, and assumed so was everyone else. Anyway, now they are both at the altar, or whatever, looking deeply into each other's eyes, and smiling, and when that line comes of speak now or forever hold your peace, I get anxious but nothing ever happens. So right as soon as the anxiousness faded away, the bride's mother stood up and objected. Blurted some shit about how she doesn't want to continue their family with a man like him. He was black, she was white. The bride-to-be cried, ran off. Wedding went faking silent. Bride's dad took the mom and ran after the bride. The groom stood there incredibly awkward. He may or may not have achieved actually leaving his body. Anyway, the groomsmen took him away. I left because it was too weird. Apparently, the reception went on. They did not get married that day, but ended up together anyway privately, and surprisingly work wasn't weird. He laughed about it. And they are happily married. Edit. Just so I don't have to individually reply to everyone's comments and questions. The mill never truly stated it was because he was black. But this guy was incredibly nice, selfless, and just someone who you completely felt comfortable around. Never judged anyone either, and well spoken. The mill also never showed signs of hating him. Who knows why it happened? Maybe the bride and groom found out. I'm not sure. I since moved and haven't spoken to them. But man, does that memory last. No objections were made, unfortunately, but back when I worked in a hotel a few years ago I got to witness a very interesting wedding. In preparation we had to ensure we'd ordered enough blue WKD, and as this was the groom's drink of choice, first red flag. The whole wedding took place in the hotel. The function room also hosted the ceremony, so we started pretty early that day. Before the ceremony the bride had taken 3 bottles of Prosecco up to her room whilst she was getting ready, and was clearly tipsy before the wedding started, but seemed to act sober enough that whoever was conducting the ceremony was none the wiser. Ceremony seemed normal, but I was prepping the bar so wouldn't have known either way. As it ends all the guests flood out for drinks whilst we changed the function room and set out the tables for the sit down meal. The guests were off as badgers, as to put it politely. I already knew one of them as he'd been to the hotel before, acting like a total wanker when I told him the bar was closed and I wouldn't be serving him. However, he was being especially polite to me this time, as it was clear his date for the wedding was definitely not the same girl he was in with just a few weeks ago, who I suspect was a paid acquaintance. Before the meal even began we were starting to worry if we'd have enough alcohol. These people drank like fish, but we managed to get them all seated and fed, and everyone is being friendly and well behaved. As the night goes on the bride is slowly becoming so drunk she can barely stand and has changed from her wedding dress into a very scant pink negligee with a tutu skirt. She's also given up on using the bathroom, so she loudly announces she will be relying solely upon nature weeds from this point onwards. Before midnight we are nearly totally out of spirits. The guests are ordering shots every round. I tried to deny service, but my manager was having none of it, and as the hotel was struggling they wanted to make as much money as possible and have shotted us out of almost everything. Blue WKDs are long gone, but the groom has a lovely blue smile at this point after the bride finally gives up trying to shot disgusting liquors that have likely been there since the hotel was built. They head to the dance floor. The party starts winding down, and it's time for the last dance, but the bride decides she'd prefer to have this with a male wedding guest, which really fucks off the groom. She then loudly announces she'll be throwing an after party in their suite and everyone is invited in the hot tub. Funnily enough, the groom isn't thrilled and kicks off. Another member of staff manages to calm everyone down and convinces the DJ to play the last dance song once more before he leaves, and the groom agrees. Everyone starts packing up, and the bride comes back from her room in her third outfit of the night, a nice grey stained tracksuit. She's adamant she wants another cigarette before bed. God knows how many packs she went through that day, especially sad considering the money for the wedding came from her parents' inheritance, who both died of cancer. She can't find a lighter and becomes irate, screaming at the groom for one. Groom claims he doesn't have one, but not taking no for an answer, she rifles through his pockets and finds one. Holding it aloft, she screams at him that he's a liar and slaps him clean across the face. The groom, obviously not having enjoyed this, returns the favor and punches her in the face. The best man spots this and leaps across a sofa and tackles the groom to the floor. They are now having a full-on fist fight whilst the bride sobs incoherently. I try and get out of the way as I'm being trampled by Mr. WKD and his scummy friend. My supervisor storms in saying he found coke in the bathroom and the police are on their way. The best man is off like a robber's dog and the groom stands there stunned and then follows his new wife into the function room. We then hear screaming and shouting from that room and the bride has picked up a chair and launched it at her husband and was now holding a second one trying to attack him with it. At this point it's about 2 AM and I'm royally done with the day. My mum is waiting for my outside, so I grab my bag and head off, giving my supervisor strict instructions to tell me exactly how this ends when I'm back for my next shift. I pass a riot van of police officers on the way out of the door, direct them to the drama and go home. Next shift I'm informed that an ambulance arrived shortly after the police. The groom was taken to the hospital after sustaining a head injury, but he did a runner from the paramedics. When he got to the hospital, the bride stayed at the hotel and to console herself spent the night with the male wedding guest she danced with. They left together in the morning and a week later announced on Facebook she was in a new relationship with him. TLDR. Bride and groom were absolutely hammered and got into a fist fight. Best man joined in, but fled before the police arrived. Bride spent the night with a wedding guest in the honeymoon suite whilst her new husband was transported to hospital. Edit. Thank you for the gold. That is so kind. Second edit. Changed here to here because I'm a lemon. A few quick clarifications. For those unfamiliar, an HOE means to urinate outside and is sometimes known as a wild wee. Do with that information what you will. Not an Irish wedding, but I have a lots of Irish family, so I can understand why that assumption may have been made. Thank you for the shiny coins and kind comments about my word choice. I'm glad it helped to set the scene. Not speak now part, but well, you'll see. Friend of mine was getting married in the park under the trees because both of them were nature people and groom had a dog that went everywhere with him that wasn't allowed in any church because dog, despite being well trained and quiet. There were some rows of chairs with lots of people filling them, including groom's mother who was sitting with his dog. Bride and groom were at the front with the officiant. Officiant begins. Officiant comes to the part where he says, "Do you take?" Groom's dog, Shadow, began to howl aloud, long mournful howl. Everyone laughed. Officiant started the question again. Loud, long mournful howl again. Everyone laughed. Groom told Shadow to come to the front. Shadow ran up, stood directly in between the bride and groom, and the officiant started again. Not a peep from Shadow. Her vows. His vows. Officiant looked at Shadow and asked, "Shadow, do you take bride and groom to be your lawfully wedded parents?" Shadow barked one single bark. Officiant concluded the ceremony. Everyone cheered and clapped, and Shadow barked 3 times, the only times that he made any sounds. Not kidding. Beautiful dog too. I once went to a wedding where both families were Irish. Girlfriend knew them but I didn't. At the ceremony, the groom's ex-wife started shouting "sheet" and was gently directed outside. I couldn't hear what was said. The reception was amazing, nice venue and all, but a bunch of guests had brought their own instruments and just started jamming what I can only describe as a genuine Irish jig. This went on for hours and remains a lasting memory of oral beauty. But I digress. There was a lot of booze. There was no responsible serving of alcohol, and I'm certain it was by design. At some point I used the men's room and was curious if I'd just seen the groom in a stall, door open, with someone who was not the bride. I didn't know these people, and it might have just been someone else, so said nothing. Sometime later, and the girlfriend states, "Seriously, we should get going now." Yeah, sure. We grab our sheet and head downstairs. I see the suspicious fellow again in the stairwell going to absolute town on this same lady. Girlfriend grabs my arm tightly and keeps walking past, mumbles a thank you for the invite. I just smile and follow cause it's all weird. Yep, that was the groom, octopusing his ex-wife, at his own wedding to another woman. The bride genuinely seemed a gem. The look that woman gave us as we passed was this smugly dominant I always get what I want. Fuck yeah, drunk as fuck glare. Wow. They had some reasonable bubbly in a tub for people to take home, and who would know or care if we hawked a few extras. I got it all explained to me after we were in a cab and well on our way home. I never got a follow up to that story, but 10/10ths on the music. Would tag along to an Irish wedding again. My boyfriend was friends with a guy who was getting a quickie marriage and needed witnesses. We agreed and went inside the little reception room where the preacher, bride, and the groom were lined up, waiting on us. The preacher started his thing and I noticed a woman come in and lean against the back wall. She looked pissed, standing with her arms crossed. Preacher, is there anyone here today who objects to the union of asterisk 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 and asterisk asterisk asterisk? Please, speak now. The couple looked back at us, and we both smiled. Suddenly, the bride's attention turned to the woman in the back of the room. Bride, what the fuck is she doing here? The woman quickly raises her hand, looking at the old preacher woman. I object. I don't agree with this marriage. The bride glares at her bride. Shut up, bitch. Wait, you're faking turn. It's my scheduled day. You're just mad you didn't think of it first. The woman had to be dragged out of the room, kicking and screaming and spitting at the bride. After the reception, my boyfriend's friend explained that he was originally in a relationship with the bride. After 10 years together, he started sleeping with her sister, the woman. They were close sisters until both ladies got pregnant by him simultaneously. They fought each other like cats and dogs for the next several years until the two cousins became school-aged and best friends. Neither one of the sisters would give up the man, and he wasn't sure which one he loved more, so he kept seeing both women. Last I heard they were all still together, but the two sisters had teamed up to take down his pregnant mistress. I'm not sure if it actually counts, but when my mother married my now stepfather, it was originally supposed to be an outdoor wedding near the edge of a lake. But the day of the weather turned bad, so they switched it last minute to a church about 100 feet away from the original spot. No big deal. I'm pretty sure this place was built exclusively for weddings, because it had a church and reception hall along with like 20 small buildings each with 2 to 3 rooms, except one that was one room. Anyways, both of my mother's parents are dead, so I'm the one that gets to give her away. I'm around 11 to 12 at this time. I also had to give away my stepfather for reasons I'll add after this. I give them away. The ceremony is coming to an end and the minister asks if anyone has any objections. It's quiet for a couple seconds, then boom, huge crack of thunder. It's over a decade later, and we still joke about it. A few extra things that happened. My now stepbrother refused to go because he hated my mom. 3 weeks before the wedding, my stepdad's parents said my mom had been sleeping with his brother. We hadn't seen them in years. 2 weeks before the wedding, my stepdad's parents left a message on the answering machine about how my mother was a terrible daughter for getting married 3 months after her mother died. My grandma had been telling them they should get married for 4 to 5 years already at that point, and this was the final straw where everyone was an invited. All in all, though it was a relatively fun wedding, I did all the stuff that the father in the wedding usually does, because I was the only one really for it. My uncle was my stepdad's best man, and my other uncle couldn't make it. As for a more fun wedding though, when my uncle got married I was 20, and he got married at a relative's house that had a very large property, and they set up a beautiful outdoor wedding there. They also set up a great alcohol tent, and the closest people, including me, to the new Liwat spent the entire night drinking and partying. We ate breakfast before we went to bed. It was amazing. I don't remember anything after the ceremony. 2 disasters. My Jewish friend married a Gentile woman. His immediate family was secular and didn't object, but his grandmother started bawling loudly at the start of the wedding ceremony, yelling in Yiddish for somebody to stop them, and making a huge scene. When the family tried to remove her, she said some other stuff in Yiddish as well, but nobody was willing to translate whatever it was for us non-speakers. My nephew, who'd had a severe head injury and wasn't quite right, got engaged to a very combative woman nobody liked. Try though they did. It began at the rehearsal dinner. The father of the bride, she being the youngest of his 8 daughters, unsteadily walked to my nephew's dad and stated, "Tell your son he's making a big mistake, she's the worst of the lot." The wedding itself actually went okay, but as the couple walked out of the church and went to get into the limo, my nephew decided to invite the best man and his date to ride with them. The bride wasn't having this and loudly declared so. Turned into a huge fight in the limo. Driver had to stop and drag my nephew out and put him in a separate car. Against all odds, the reception went off without bloodshed, but proceedings didn't end well. They went to an island honeymoon resort, and after 2 days, the owner kicked them out because of their unceasing, screaming fights. The end took several more years. One night, my phone rang after midnight. It was my nephew calling from a phone booth. He tells me, rather calmly, that she's trying to kill him. At that moment, there was a huge crashing noise. She had run the car into the phone booth. Fortunately, there were steel concrete posts protecting the booth from just such a situation and he escaped relatively unscathed. She was too obese to pursue him any distance on foot. The divorce took 2 more years. This is a throwaway account. Just to get this story off my chest. He and I were best buddies since preschool. I went on vacation with his family, he with mine. We had a falling out in high school over a girl, but got over it later on. When he started to get serious with a girl, I was very happy for him. His dad was never around, and his mom tried, but he needed the kind of love and sense of fulfillment that a loving partner can provide. He did well with the ladies and never seemed to lack a date, but I'd never seen him in love. Until he met her. He was really secretive about her, but, as his best friend, he told me bits and pieces and said how serious he was getting with her. He finally agreed on a double date with me and my girl. My girl and I weren't really all that serious, but we liked each other, hung out a lot, and the sex was great. As 20-somethings, we were both more into our careers and our next goal than a serious relationship. We agreed to be exclusive but honest about it if that changed. From time to time we liked to experiment with things, and that included picking up girls at clubs to bring back for the evening. She was into that as much as I was. Lucky me, eh? My girl was by all standards a pretty girl. A solid 9 at any time, and when she went all out with the makeup and look, she was a solid 10. Smart, carried herself like a modern professional woman, and practically anything goes in the bedroom. One night, out on the club hunt for a third, we struck gold. This girl was perfect. That is the best way to describe her. Perfect. 5'8" or so, toned body with a flat stomach, large but not too much so breasts. The perfect as that looked like a sculpture's creation in that dress, and a face that was simultaneously angelic and teasing. She was a 10 plus. After a few drinks and jokes, I'm good with making the ladies laugh. My girlfriend drops the first hint on her that we may be game for some grown-up fun. She practically jumped on it. We left, and within 30 minutes I was covered in every man's dream for the rest of the night. She left in the morning after a shower and some food with no hint of shame or regret. I wanted her to stay. As you can guess, the girl my best friend brought to dinner was her. Dinner was awkward, but we survived. When I spoke the next day with him, he asked if it was just him feeling awkward. Knowing how serious he was getting with her, I was conflicted. I pussied out and didn't let him know about that night my girlfriend and I shared with his girlfriend. Hey, he was a player, and after a while, he would probably grow tired of her too, right? A few days later, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had invited her back for another night. Apparently, she enjoyed that night as much as my girl and I did. My girlfriend didn't really know my friend and read that this girl was probably playing with him as much as he was with her, and we really had fun with her. I told them I couldn't. That was my lifetime pal, and it wasn't right. They were already on the couch and responded by starting to make out. I said I was going to leave. They didn't respond other than to get a bit more aggressive. I was like, great. So, I told them to have fun and left. The next time I went over to my girl's house, she was there. She hasn't moved in, but she and my girl were having a fling, and by our rules that was fine. I made sure to call ahead and schedule date time with my girl, and within a month we weren't really seeing each other that much. She and my best friend's girl, however, were point like an idiot. I drunk texted, hey, my 20s, I should have known better, but, my now distant girl, and she told me to come on over. She promised her girlfriend wouldn't be there. We started having some great usage, and somewhere in the middle of round 2, we were joined by her girlfriend, my best friend's girl. I was, into things and thought to myself, well, if they do things and I only do things with my girl, well, next day I felt like a douche. The alcohol was blamed, and I moved on. That same day my best called me to say he was going to propose to her. I asked to meet him to talk it over. I tried to go the route of how well do you really know her? I almost came out and said I have to tell you something. Then I lied to him and said the reason that dinner was awkward is that we had seen her in the club a few nights prior and she was obviously going to have sex with someone else. He blew that off by saying they weren't exclusive then and he had a thing when he traveled that same week. No big deal. Point. She accepted. Wedding is set and I'm the best man. My distant girlfriend and I are friends, but by this point, I've backed out of the relationship. However, she is going to the wedding, and while I was dating around we agreed to a date for the wedding. At the rehearsal dinner, my old girl and I get some alone time, and she reveals how upset she is with the wedding. That my best friend's girl and she had been living together and were in love. But since my best friend's girl's parents were so conservative she could never explain her lifestyle to them. Point. When the person leading the ceremony asked any legal objection to this union, I knew the voice right away. My girlfriend couldn't take it but kept silent. My best friend's father stopped the wedding saying he knew about her lifestyle and couldn't allow his son to marry her. The cold-hearted bastard who was never around had the balls to come forth where I, his best friend, did not. The wedding reception and wedding were one event and people lingered for a good time. My best friend never cried or even seemed too upset. He said that over the past couple of weeks prior to the wedding she had changed, but it was too late to stop the wedding. To this day he doesn't know about our trysts. TLDR, my best friend's girl was in a tryst with me and my girl. His dad stopped the wedding after he found out. A few years down the road he and I are still best friends and that score from high school was even. Musician here. Play frequently at weddings. This was by far my worst one ever. Not at the moment of speak now but still pretty impressive. Groom books my string quartet for the entire day. Ceremony, drinks, meal. All seems to go well, though you can tell the groom's family is much more well off than the bride's, and she seems to be a bit of an attention hoe. But either way, ceremony and drinks went without a hitch. Everyone seemed very happy. Fast forward to the meal. We played through the whole thing, and as we were packing up they started speeches. Usually we'd have left by this point, but our stuff was in a little side room off the banquet room separated only by salon-style swing doors, and we had no way of getting out unless we walked awkwardly between the guests' tables. So we decided to stay put until the speeches were over and listen in. Best man's and FOB speeches went well, and then it was left to the groom. He thanked everyone for coming and then said that for his speech he needed everyone to open the envelopes that had been placed on the tables. We'd noticed these on the way in, but hadn't thought anything of it. There was an excited bustling as people appointed someone on each table to open the envelopes, followed shortly by a very quick change in the atmosphere. Someone gasped, and another person audibly said, "What the fuck is this?" Amongst the general confusion. The groom gets back on the microphone and says, "Yes, I'm sorry to say that what you see in these pictures has been going on for about 2 months. Needless to say I will be annulling the marriage. Thank you all for coming." Turns out the bride had been having an affair with the best man and the groom had found out and hired a private investigator to photograph them at it. He'd printed the pictures and put them in the envelopes. Of course, chaos ensued. The groom dropped Mick and bailed immediately. The bride's mother threw red wine all over her dress and kept screaming that she was a hoe along with an awful lot of things alluding to the fact that she'd never find another good rich man again. The groom's 2 brothers beat up the best man pretty badly. There was a lot of screaming and glass throwing. The bride was crying uncontrollably and everyone left as it was so awkward. We just hid in our little side room until everyone had gone and then emerged, slightly shell-shocked, to inspect the pictures. There could be no doubt as to what was happening in them. The groom emailed us a few days later and apologized to us as he realized we'd got stuck. He explained that he'd only found out a fortnight before the wedding, and having paid for everything with little chance of refunds, He just decided to go ahead with it and out her so that she couldn't twist the story to her family after the fact. How he made it through the entire wedding I will never know, but it certainly made for an interesting day at work. So not during this part. But I was a wedding planner with a local company, and that entailed me attending receptions. To make sure everything ran smoothly prior to the ceremony, the grandfather asked me which room the groom was in, so he could have a chat with him. I walked him to the room, and he gave the groom plane tickets and a hotel reservations completely paid for to Greece. The parents had told the bride and groom not to make plans after the wedding for 2 weeks, as it's customary in their family for grandparents to gift the honeymoon. The groom starts crying and thanks the grandparents. Groom puts the stuff in his coat pocket to thank the grandparents during the reception and surprise the bride. Ceremony over, everyone all smiles, cocktail hour ends, everyone sits down to dinner, and they do the introductions. The entire bridal party is now seated. Best man, groom's brother makes a speech. Sister of the bride, matron of honor makes a speech. Groom makes a speech to his bride. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to our family, the generous support, and to grandma and grandpa for giving us a once and a lifetime trip to Greece. Cue bride crying, applause. But he continues, I won't be taking this trip. Throws down everything from his pocket. My brother and wife should be taking this trip seeing as she's been F him for the last 6 months, and just walks out. My friends, we'll call them Brad and Janet, were getting married. This was a couple of years ago. Brad is bisexual. Brad's friends and family, including Janet, are all aware of this. Janet's family doesn't know as they are rather conservative and probably won't made a scene. Brad's best man is his ex, Frank. Brad and Frank were together for almost 7 years and broke up because Brad wanted to get married and have kids. Frank didn't. They decided compromising would end up with one of them being miserable / resenting the other person. Breakup was amicable, but both of them were devastated. However, they remained friends. Brad met Janet only 2 weeks after breaking up with Frank and proposed less than 6 months later. At the time of the wedding they'd known each other less than a year, but they seemed really happy, so no one thought anything of it. The ceremony goes off without a hitch. Janet's maid of honor gives a really lovely toast that has quite a few people tearing up. Frank gives his best man speech right after. Now I found out after the wedding that Brad had asked Frank to not mention anything in his speech about their previous involvement, specifically because of Janet's family not knowing about his sexuality. Frank had agreed. However, Frank was a little tipsy when he gave his speech. I knew things were about to go off the rails when Frank said, I can't do this. He goes on to say that breaking up with Brad was the biggest regret he had, that he still loved him, and he knew that Brad still loved him too because he told him so. Frank gets escorted out of the reception. The rest of the night is very awkward. Brad and Janet go on their honeymoon, but from what I was told they spent the entire time fighting. The fighting continued after they got home. During a particularly nasty spat, Brad reveals that he hooked up with Frank during his bachelor party and that yes, he did still have feelings for him. They gave it the old college try, but Janet left Brad like 9 months after they got married. Janet is remarried to a great guy and is pregnant with her first child. I will be attending Brad and Frank's wedding in May. I've posted this before and my family found me, but whatever, it's my cake day. True story. My father has been married 5 times and at the last wedding it happened twice. July 7th, 2007, the family and friends began to gather, all of us taking turns trying to talk him out of marrying the woman he had only met a few months before, but his mind was set. Since the date was so popular and arrangements were made so late, the minister was a used car salesman with a certificate from an online site. The wedding and reception were held in my father's backyard that happened to be right next door to his best friend, which he proves to be that day. I was resigned to my fate of best man that day, my first and only time with that honor. When the ceremony began, my father began with a speech explaining how 2 people could meet and fall in love in such a short time, and that he knew it was hard to believe. And that's when his best friend, just in time from his fishing trip, raised his Tanqueray and tonic to ask, is this the part where we object? Cause I'd like to. In all my life I've never witnessed the mix of relief / shock / humor / horror and all the other emotions this stirred. My sister cried, his friends laughed, her family cringed, but my sweet grandmother was so stoic I'll never forget. My father calmly said, "No bud, not yet," and went on. He began to talk about other relationships and people, and how he knew this a marriage that would last. And that's when our hero spoke again. "How about now? I really need to object to this." The same sentiment was felt throughout, and yet my father replied, "No bud, we're not doing that," and then turned to the minister and said, "We should probably skip that part." The ceremony went on, and so did the marriage for about 6 months TL. Doctor, my dad's best friend, objected at his wedding, and my dad wished he had listened. I was a groomsman in a wedding 2 years ago. The bride and groom had been together for right around 4 years. They decided to write their own vows. The groom went through his. They were sweet as hell. He is a really great dude. The wife decided that during the vows is the appropriate time to let him and everyone else know that he would soon be a father. Everyone was crying, hugging. It was a pretty cool moment, especially being from the Midwest / Bible Belt, where that kind of thing normally gets frowned upon. Everything was going great up until a point in the reception where the bride was talking to a friend of hers, telling her how excited she was to be having a girl. Somehow, no one caught this except the groom, who got up, threw his drink at the wall and shattered it, called his new wife a stupid slut, and told her she was a cheating hoe and stormed out. The bride started crying and swore she never cheated on him and couldn't believe he was ruining their special day. The other groomsman and I ran outside to see what was up with him, and then it hit all of us at the same time. She was 16 weeks pregnant, and he had only been home from Afghanistan for 8 weeks. She didn't think that anyone would catch that, and was somehow going to try and convince her husband they were having the baby early. I have not heard much from him or her since the wedding, but it was heavily rumored that the pregnancy was a result of a one-night stand with one of my buddy's cousins. TLDR, wife cheats on husband and gets pregnant while husband is overseas. Tells husband she's pregnant, forgets timeline of pregnancy when talking to a friend. Will probably get buried as I'm a little late to the party, but oh well. This is a good excuse to tell one of my favorite stories. About 2 years ago I attended a wedding in Nice, France. It was my older cousin getting married to his girlfriend. She, the fiancée, was French and so is my cousin's dad. However, my auntie is from Scotland. So my cousin, James, the groom, is half French, half Scottish. Anyway, an argument ensued before the wedding as my family wanted the wedding to be in Scotland and my cousin's dad and future wife wanted it to be in France. They settled in France, and to say the very least, my family were not happy. Me and my mum were happy for the excuse to go to France, but my extended family were fuming. They just could not get over it. Anyway, we got to France 2 days before the wedding. On the day we went to a beautiful converted barn in Nice and waited as the barn filled up with family and friends. My extended family weren't there, and my cousin's dad was fuming that they'd refused to come due to it not being in Scotland. My cousin stood nervously awaiting his future wife. She came out and all went smoothly. They began the cows, and when it came the time to object, almost in impeccable timing, the door to the barn berth opened and in came 15 to 20 of my extended family, dressed in kilts and 3 of them brandishing bagpipes. They stormed down the aisle playing the bagpipes badly and singing the Scottish anthem and football chants. Everyone in the barn turned horrified to see them storming around and singing. The bride laughed hysterically, but my cousin didn't look happy. Then, my great uncle took to the stage and said, "Are we James?" I was going to ask LPA we behind, but we decided it best to join the festivities. Congratulations from us all. The Scottish lot are in tune, and we're here for the free bar and some frog's legs. People erupted with laughter and even the French side of my family had a giggle. The wedding continued as normal and the beautiful elegant reception was overrun with kilt wearing clowns singing and dancing at every opportunity. Was a grand night and one I'll never forget. No objections. However, the cake lady reported the cake. Mother makes cakes and this one Bridezilla family decided they weren't going to pay for the cake. Admittedly, the cake was 20 minutes late being delivered. They never actually paid the deposit. Then once we were delivering it, the mother-in-law slash mom decided that wedding cakes have some 30 minutes or it's free guarantee. When they figured out that wasn't going to work and we still required payment, they said they flat out weren't going to pay because it would completely ruined their day. They also claimed that they ordered another cake from Walmart because we were late. Sure buddy. My mother had us set up the cake anyway, figuring she could reason with the bride herself. Of course the bride was more preoccupied with other events to respond. Most of the guests hadn't even arrived to the after ceremony services anyway. They weren't married in the same place. There was a bit of a drive between the two venues. After most of the guests had arrived and we were getting nowhere on payment, my mother had us repo the cake, and at this point the venue was full, 200 plus people watching in awe. Footnote, she had signed a contract, but they never paid the required deposit. In her 30 plus years of doing this, she figured she didn't want to ruin this lady's day, so she made the cake anyway. Point, she had given her the benefit of doubt. Later on we found out they tried the same sheet with the DJ. We ended up taking the cake to a local charity for kids. Can't remember the name. They were ecstatic. I wonder how the festivities went afterwards. Oh man, one of the most awkward moments I've ever lived through. I was running the soundboard for the wedding of some good friends. My position will become relevant in a moment. Point, the bride's parents were not in favor of the match. They were well off and felt that their Ivy League educated daughter was too good for the groom, who grew up on the streets in Miami. Sadly, they were missing out on the fact that he is one of the most genuine and admirable people on this planet, and you couldn't ask for a man of better character to be marrying your daughter. The bride and groom respectfully tried to win them over for quite some time, but once they got engaged the parents made their level of disapproval known by refusing to contribute financially to the wedding. Point, the wedding date draws near, and despite various tactics from the parents, including the mother of the bride, mob, getting the father to agree not to walk his baby girl down the aisle, it becomes clear that the bride and groom are truly committed to each other and absolutely will not call it off. The parents seem to resign to the outcome and decide to attend the wedding. Yay. Unfortunately, Dave, it turns out that the mob is a total narcissist and couldn't just let it go. Here's where my helming the sound system intersects with the drama. Point, the ceremony begins. Everything is going as rehearsed. I'm fading and transitioning everybody's respective music with perfection, focusing hard to keep everything smooth, lest it distract from the wedding itself. Then it is time for the bride's entrance. I get the thumbs up from the wedding coordinator and fade up on a beautiful piano and cello track. The minister asks everyone to rise, and we all look at the doors in eager expectation. They should open after a few measures of the music, but they don't. Music keeps playing, still nothing. The bride's music was the only one that was clipped prior to me receiving it, and it is only about 40 seconds long, so we reach the end of the track with still no bride. The coordinator and I decide to play it one more time. Same results, just more awkward. Point, now the room is silent, confused looks being passed around. Then we hear it. The mob had snuck out into the hall to make her objections known to her daughter one last time, face to face, just as she should have been walking down the aisle. She is hissing her whispered arguments right behind the closed doors. About 2 minutes later, mob re-enters the sanctuary and takes her seat next to her husband, seeming unaware of how unbelievably tense the room is with awkwardness, thanks to her. The coordinator talks to the bride, and another minute later we are ready to do her entrance for real. Cue the music. Point, the doors open, the beautiful bride enters. You can tell from her face that she is feeling a lot, as you can imagine, but is still overjoyed to see her groom at the altar. She is determined to marry him. Point, we all exhale, but then the drama continues. She makes it halfway down the aisle and her father stands up. He couldn't take it anymore and decided there was no way he was going to let his daughter walk down the aisle alone. He makes his way through his row and joins her to walk her the rest of the way. It is an amazing moment until narcissist mob strikes again. Point, she quickly follows him and joins them in the aisle. We all hear mob loudly whisper, "I told you not to do this," to her husband. The music runs out again. They end up staying there in a huddle, holding each other and crying for several minutes. Mob sits down and the father and bride finish her journey to the altar together. The minister wisely omits asking the audience for objections. The rest of the ceremony goes on uninterrupted. At the reception dinner, Mob tries to save face during her toast fails miserably. All of the guests shower the bride and groom with new heights of love and support, and they go off into their new life together more committed than ever, thanks to her parents' determination to keep them apart. Not quite what you're looking for, but close point. When I was 17, I was invited as a +1 by a Russian friend I was courting to go to a wedding with her. It was sort of our first date. She warned me that it was going to be all in Russian, both the ceremony and the reception. I don't speak anything but English, but I figured I'd give it a try. So anyways, the whole thing is boozy AF. The minute we arrive, my date's older sister and other guests are handing us shots to do out of the trunks of their cars. We get in, and the staff hands us drinks. The ceremony goes on a while, but we are all just boozing throughout. Everyone. We were 4 years underage, and the adults were just feeding us vodka and champagne, like it was no big deal. At the reception, each table had about 12 bottles of various booze. Nobody at all was speaking English, except my date to interpret for me between her own social interactions. There was dancing, and music, and plenty of delicious food. I was having a great time despite the language barrier. People were giving toasts occasionally. Anyways, this one lady in a really tacky dress and obviously way too drunk stands up and clunks her glass to give a toast. Everyone tries to ignore it, but she persists. The room goes quiet, and she speaks in drunken Russian for about 2 minutes, while the room groans uncomfortably, then collapses back to her chair. My date leans over to tell me what she said as the band strikes back up, but I looked at her and said she was talking about how marriage is hard and not always so fun. It's a death sentence, but one worth celebrating, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? My date looks at me and says, "You asshole, you do know Russian?" No, I just have enough drinks in me to figure that one out. We dated for 2 years and have been friends for more than 15 years now. Went to a wedding with my ex. It was his cousin's wedding. I hadn't met many of them, but they were light-hearted and silly with each other. So when the JP asked if there were any objects to the bride and groom's wedding, a girl stood up and cleared her throat. I laughed audibly. She just said, "I love you, don't do this." Gasps filled the air. I realized it was real. Whispering everywhere. Bride ran out crying. Groom stood there mouth agape. Everyone was staring at him. Groom left. The objection girl followed. Then bridal party and parents. A few minutes later everyone but the bride, groom, and girl came back. Groom walked in visually upset. Then the bride and the other woman came in behind him. They went up to the altar. Groom, "I'm sorry, but there will be no wedding today." Slight sob. "Please stay for food and drinks, the party has been paid for." Everyone went to the reception confused, hoping for answers. After about half an hour, the wedding party showed back up. Bride, groom, woman. All sharing a few bottles of champagne, laughing, smiling. To the mic goes the bride. "I'm sorry to groom for this, but I'd like to share with you all that I'm gay." Girl walks up beside the bride, and they kiss. Groom takes the mic, so three-way. The room erupted with laughter. It was a fun, but incredibly awkward wedding reception. The two women are now married with children. No idea what happened to the groom. My sister owns an older Arabian stallion horse. At the time, she was living on a dead-end road on a large property in an area of our city where there were several other horse owners, and it was a nice, private location with plenty of room to exercise the horse. One day my sister and I arrive at her house after doing errands to find a woman she has never seen before, standing over by the horse petting. As you can imagine, my country side of the family was very happy about this. The wedding was beautiful too. It was country themed, but more country fantasy, with my little cousins dressed as like nymphs and elves, and she's running around throwing petals. Anyways, by the time it's the priest's turn to say the classic, "If there are any objections to this marriage" line, he can barely let the words tumble out of his mouth when my uncle, the father to my cousin getting married, begins to stand up whilst pulling a 12-gauge shotgun out from under his chair and turns to survey the crowd. We all laughed because it was clearly a joke, but it was certainly one of the funniest and most surreal things I'd seen at a wedding in my entire life. No, I guess I didn't see anyone object at the wedding, but really, I can't blame them.